So now, the question will be, are there any advantages from using prestressed concrete? Why do we use prestressed concrete? Does it have any advantages over reinforced concrete? So let's see. Let's compare the two. Let's compare reinforced concrete and prestressed concrete. So say for example, we have here a reinforced concrete, simply supported beam, simply supported reinforced concrete. So it has concrete and then it has reinforcement, steel reinforcement obviously. And then say for example, it has a span with a magnitude L and it carries a load, uniformly distributed load, which has a magnitude of the sum of the service loads. So that we have here a reinforced concrete, which has a length L and carrying service loads. Now, let's say for example, we have here also a pre-stressed concrete, which is composed of obviously the concrete, the pre-stressing reinforcement, and as well as the what we call non-pre-stressing reinforcement. So for those of you who thinks that pre-stressed concrete doesn't have any steel reinforcement, just like in reinforced concrete, actually pre-stressed concrete also have steel reinforcement. Actually, we call that non-pre-stressing reinforcement. It also has reinforcement, steel reinforcement, in addition to the pre-stressing reinforcement. So again, say for example, same as this, we have a simply supported pre-stressed concrete with the same length as this one, as this reinforced concrete, and also carrying the same magnitude of service loads. So we have here a reinforced concrete and a prestressed concrete. They are both carrying same magnitude of service loads with the same length, same magnitude of span. So let's compare the two. Let's compare reinforced concrete and prestressed concrete. Are there any advantages from using prestressed concrete? So the answer with that question is obviously yes, there are advantages. So let us enumerate what are the advantages on using prestressed concrete. First on the list is that obviously, if you will look on the figure, this is the prestressed concrete, this is the reinforced concrete. One of the advantage of using prestressed concrete is that in terms of design, prestressed concrete have shallower depth compared to reinforced concrete, which can be obviously seen on this illustration. So you can see reinforced concrete, prestressed concrete, they are both carrying same magnitude of service load and same length. But if you will see, if you will compare the two, it requires shallower depth for a prestressed concrete than a reinforced concrete. So that is one of the advantages of using prestressed concrete. So with that advantage, due to that advantage, tendency is, since it has a shallower depth requirement compared to reinforced concrete, the tendency is it will require lesser volume of concrete as well as lesser number of reinforcement. So if there will be lesser volume of concrete and lesser number of reinforcement, tendency is it will require uh, less uh, less cost in terms of materials. If we will just talk about the 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 advantage in terms of shallower depth. Later on, you will see that there is a what we call additive deductive uh, uh, effect in terms of uh, the materials needed for a pre-stressed concrete compared to a reinforced concrete. But at this point in time, we can say that pre-stressed concrete requires shallower depth compared to reinforced concrete and therefore requires less concrete and less reinforcement. Another advantage of using prestressed concrete is that it requires less maintenance, unlike reinforced concrete, due to the fact that prestressed concrete is stronger. Obviously, it is stronger than an ordinary reinforced concrete. Another advantage is that uh, longer working life. So, prestressed concrete compared to reinforced concrete, possibly the prestressed concrete will have a longer working life because prestressed concrete requires better quality control of the concrete being used. So, uh, construction of prestressed concrete requires uh, extensive or strict quality control in terms of the quality of the concrete, unlike on reinforced concrete. So that the tendency is that since we have a better quality control of the concrete, tendency is that there is a possibility that the prestressed concrete will have a longer life in comparison with the equivalent reinforced concrete. And another advantage, actually, at some point related to the first advantage, uh, since prestressed concrete requires shallower depth, therefore it needs less volume of concrete and less number of reinforcement. The tendency is it will have a lighter weight compared to the equivalent reinforced concrete. So therefore, in terms of the foundations, since the members on the superstructure, meaning when we say superstructure, these are the parts of a building, for example, or a structure that is above the ground, above the ground. So since we have smaller dimensions of members, since it is made of prestressed concrete, tendency is that we have a lighter weight of the superstructure. So if we have a lighter weight of the superstructure, and we know that the superstructures will be carried by the foundation, tendency is we will have also lesser or smaller dimensions of foundations since it carries lesser weight of the superstructure. So if the foundation will have a smaller dimension, obviously it will be lighter in terms of weight. Less advantage of prestressed concrete is that it is very good for long spans to reduce cracking and long-term deflection. So uh, just like what I have discussed on our introduction, prestressed concrete is very advantageous to use when it comes to long span members. So uh, it eradicates the tendency to have cracking because pre-stress reinforcement or pre-stressing usually produces what we call camber. So camber is just like deflection but in opposite direction. Deflection is movement downward. Camber is it's something like deflection, but it moves upward. So due to that camber, tendency is that uh, the pre-stressed concrete will have the tendency to minimize deflection due to the applied load. So that is one of the advantages of using pre-stressed concrete, especially to long span structures or members. But if we have advantages, we also have disadvantages. Although these are just disadvantages, but still we have disadvantages of using pre-stressed concrete in comparison to reinforced concrete. So first on the list of the disadvantages is that related to what I have said before here. Uh, since the construction of pre-stressed concrete is not as easy as the construction of reinforced concrete, since it requires a higher quality of materials. Actually, you cannot you cannot use normal type of concrete as well as the steel. You cannot use normal concrete and steel in prestressed concrete construction, unlike in reinforced concrete, because the materials needed for a prestressed concrete requires to be uh, of higher quality. So tendency, if the materials have higher quality, the repercussion of that will be it will require higher costs. So that is what I have said on the first advantages. There is what we call additive deductive. So we have reduced the volume of concrete and the number of reinforcement, but since these materials requires to have a higher quality, tendency there will be a uh, additive cost due to that requirement of higher quality materials. Next on the disadvantages is that construction of prestressed concrete is again not as easy as the reinforced concrete, because we in prestressed concrete we need what we call prestressing operations, so that this prestress reinforcement can impose compressive force on the concrete. We cannot just simply put that pre-stressing reinforcement on that concrete and then it will already apply a compressive force to the concrete. Actually, there is what we call pre-stressing operations, wherein the the pre-stressing reinforcement are initially stretch out. They are being pulled out or stretched out, and then after some time it will be cut. So the tendency is that since the material, the tendon, or I mean the pre-stressing reinforcement elongated, the natural tendency of a material that elongates, given that it is still elastic, the natural tendency is that it will try to uh, it will it will try to go back to its original length. So since this pre-stressing reinforcement is trying to go back to its original length, which is obviously shorter than this length, tendency due to that uh, it consequently applies compressive force to the concrete, since it is trying to it is trying to go back to its original length, which is again obviously lesser than the length of the concrete. So that particular activity requires pre-stressing operations, which is again will result to added costs. So actually that is the disadvantage of using pre-stressed concrete in terms of cost. It will always be in terms of cost. Pre-stressed concrete will always have a higher cost, higher construction costs than a reinforced concrete. Another disadvantage of pre-stressed concrete is that unlike reinforced concrete, which has normally has simpler cross-sectional geometry, like for example, it is just rectangular or T section whatsoever. Unlike that on reinforced concrete, pre-stressed concrete usually has complex geometry of sections. It is not usually as simple as a rectangular cross section. It usually has complex type of cross section, which later on you will see what are those complex types of the geometry of the sections of a pre-stressed concrete. So if we will compare the advantages and the disadvantages of using pre-stressed concrete, obviously we have many advantages than disadvantages. Although again, just like what I have said before, usually the disadvantage of using prestressed concrete is that it will incur higher costs, higher construction costs than reinforced concrete construction. So we are done with our second goal. We are already familiar with the advantages of using prestressed concrete. We're now down to the second to the last goal for this discussion, which is to be familiar with the historical development of prestressing. So let's go to that goal. Let us address that goal.